Hello, I'm Alan Lightman. I am director of the Harpswell Foundation. I am also professor of humanities at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT, located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States. Right now, we are in a classroom at MIT. It is March 5th, 2014. We are going to hear a debate by MIT students. The proposition of the debate is prostitution should be made legal. The pro team will argue why prostitution should be legal, and the con team will argue why prostitution should not be legal. The format of the debate is the following. Each team will have 5 minutes to give its opening arguments. Then each team will have 5 minutes to show why the arguments of the other team are wrong. That is called the rebuttal. And finally, each team will have 5 minutes to summarize their case. Because we hope that this debate will be used by many students, for some of whom English is not their first language, we will be speaking more slowly than usual. So before beginning, I would like to introduce our debaters. On my right is the pro team, Katie Ward and Andre Salgado Behrman. And on my left is the con team, Muriel Levy and Matthew Cole. So let the fun begin.
Hello again. My name is Katie Ward, and I will be presenting the first speech of the pro team in favor of the legalization of prostitution. We support this proposition for two main reasons. The first being that it is safer for the sex workers and the women involved. The second being is that it promotes the idea of individual autonomy. I shall go to our first point, that it is safer for sex workers. Under this idea, we believe that legalizing prostitution will reduce crime. We think this for two reasons. The first, that if organizations are not forced to work within illegal markets, they will not or do less illegal acts. Often, these illegal prostitution rings are supplemented by, say, the illegal drugs trade or the illegal arms trade or even human trafficking. The second reason as to why we think this reduces crime is that it'll encourage women to come forward if there is an abuse. In the current system, without the legalization, women may fear to come forward because they too could be punished for being involved in prostitution. If prostitution is illegal, then the women could also be charged. Therefore, they would be less likely to ask for help if there is an injustice. When we legalize prostitution, we don't legalize physical abuse, we don't legalize human trafficking, we don't legalize drugs or arms or violence. We want to keep, ultimately, the people involved safe. The second reason as to why we think this is safer for the workers is that a study done by the University of Nebraska here in the United States states that brothels offer the safest environment available for women to sell consensual sex acts for money. The key word is consensual, which means that these women have agreed to sell sex for money, and they are not forced into this environment. So we think that brothels could actually be safer within a legal system because there are legal frameworks to work within, such as licenses, such as health care, such as tax benefits, employment benefits, and lots of other positive things that come from being employed in a legal way. So we think that this is much beneficial for the sex workers. The third reason under this is that we can encourage more testing for sexually transmitted diseases. This has become a huge problem in a lot of countries where prostitution has kind of run rampant, where the women and the workers are not being safe and are not being tested and can spread diseases as serious as HIV and then ultimately AIDS. So we think legalizing this will increase healthcare benefits and also encourage these brothels to work with the regulations of the government to make sure that maybe there is monthly testing, that the consumers have to use protection when being involved. There are lots of regulatory tools that could be implemented to keep the women and the consumer safer. So our second big point as to why we should legalize prostitution is that it promotes individual autonomy. Autonomy is the right to behave as an individual, to do what you want to do, to have freedom over your own body. That is autonomy. And we think this will be increased in legalizing the sex trade. I have a quote from a Cornell law professor here in the United States. "Prostitution should not be a crime. Prostitutes are not committing an inherently harmful act. While the spread of disease and other detriments are possible in the practice of prostitution, criminalization is a sure way of exacerbating rather than addressing such effects." She's basically saying that we just shove things underground, less regulation, which is more harmful for these women who aren't actually committing a crime or a dangerous act. And the second thing under this, which my partner will go into further, is that prostitution isn't going anywhere. It's one of the oldest professions that we have here on earth. And we think pretending like it shouldn't or doesn't exist won't fix the problems that we have in terms of repressing or keeping women at a lower level than men. We think we have a lot of positive things on our side. Thank you.
Hello, I am Moria Levy, and I will be presenting on the con side. We believe that prostitution should not be legal, and we have two main reasons as to why this is the case. The first of these reasons is that prostitution being legal will actually increase sex trafficking and violent crime. The second main reason is that legalizing prostitution promotes the dominance and putting down of women by men in our society. So, going to our first point, that legalizing prostitution will increase sex trafficking and violent crime. Sex trafficking is something that exists today and is in fact the basis for many houses of prostitution. In fact, when prostitution becomes legal, it becomes easier to cover up the fact that sex trafficking is going on. Why is this the case? This is because when a woman is taken from her own society and forced to be a prostitute, in normal cases, if she is being sex trafficked, she can go to the authorities and and the people who have done this will be prosecuted. However, if prostitution is legal, the people who are trafficking women will actually be able to claim that everything they're doing is legal and consensual, even if that is not true, and it'll be the word of one person against the word of another. And often, the voice of the sex traffickers will be based upon the voice of all the money that they are making from controlling prostitution. And so the women who are sex trafficked will not be better off. Here's a quote from Germany, where in fact prostitution has been made legal. "The autonomous prostitute we envisioned when the prostitution law was enacted in 2001, who negotiates on equal terms with her client and can support herself with her income, is the exception." What does this say? This says that in fact legalizing prostitution has not made women's lives better. Women are still forced to be prostitutes. And this idea that this will be better for them and they will be safer actually is not valid. They will be worse off because it is harder for them to get out of a situation of sex trafficking, and they will continue to be in a low-income situation. Our second point is that prostitution promotes the dominance and putting down of women by men. In general, prostitution is a male consumer market where men solicit prostitution from women. And so this is based on a premise of sexual dominance, where a man dominates a woman sexually and intellectually. If prostitution is legalized, men will continue to see women as objects. And this is not in line with the values that all of us have of gender equality that we are trying to promote in our society and that we are trying to improve. We want women to participate equally in society, and they cannot do that if men put them down. Prostitution is one of the many ways and one of the worst ways in which men see women as objects and will continue to put them down, especially in developing countries that have the highest amount of sex workers. This is very difficult because they do not have the regulation which allows them to make sure that prostitution is something that's happening on equal terms between the man who is buying the prostitution and the woman who is selling it. And so it is extremely essential that in these countries and in every country we have criminalization of prostitution, that prostitution is not made legal, so that authorities can crack down on it and can make sure that prostitution does not occur, so that we can promote these important values of the equality of women in our society. Prostitution can never be separated from oppression and objectification. As much as we want to think of a woman as autonomous and that she is making this choice to be a prostitute, truly prostitution will always be based on a woman being forced to do something she does not want to do. For these reasons, we are against legalizing prostitution.
Hello again. I'm Andres Salgado Bierman, and I'll be presenting arguments to refute the arguments that the leader of the opposition has just made. But before I get into the specific points that she mentioned, I want to talk more broadly about the case. I think at the end of the day, we have to look at and decide on what is going to happen to the women who are potentially in danger in this case. And furthermore, we have to decide this case on what is possible. I want to remind everyone of what my partner said, that prostitution is going to continue to exist. And with that being said, I want to talk about how we can actually deal with this problem. The first argument the leader of the opposition said was that making prostitution legal will increase sex trafficking and increase violent crime. Now, the example she used to support this was in Germany and in the Netherlands, where prostitution was made legal by almost a complete deregulation, everything goes kind of philosophy. But we see that kind of philosophy applied to many different industries can allow for terrible abuses. In the coal industry, you can have terrible health hazards to minors. In the pharmaceutical profession, you can have dangerous drugs being produced and then pushed to market. We think that if you legalize prostitution, but do it in a sensible way, with a sensible regulatory body, that you can actually have a system that's safer for the consumer and for the prostitutes themselves. Because demand will push to go to a licensed prostitute that the consumer knows is clean and safe. This is better for public health as it will reduce the spread of STIs. And furthermore, once you're working as a licensed professional, you can more easily report abuse. You can more easily report instances of violence and trafficking. And that's the second thing I want to say in response to this, that actually it will not make it easier for people to get away with these crimes. It will make it harder for them to get away with these crimes, because the barrier in persecuting these crimes or even finding them is getting the women who are being oppressed in these situations to speak up. Once they know there's a legal means to engage in their trade and a government that's willing to support them when there's malpractice, we'll be able to find those bad people who are out there. Now I want to respond to the second thing they said. And this was that legalizing prostitution promotes the repression of women by men. So going back to that idea that prostitution is still going to exist, how can we have it exist in a way that is less harmful to women and to the image of women in society? I would say, first of all, that once a woman is a legalized prostitute as per profession, she's no more an object than your doctor or even your political representative. There's someone who you are paying, you are charging to get a certain service, just like any other service in the economy. I think it is the fact that prostitution is illegal, that we view prostitutes as criminals and the social stigma associated with that, that people get the idea that they can treat them worse or as less. Once you make it legal, I believe that will go away. The last thing I want to talk about is that it also empowers women to take control of their own body and to take control of that bodily autonomy. Instead of having the state repressing these women, saying, we know you're in a hard place and this may be the only option for you to have income, but we're going to restrict that freedom from you, we're empowering women to take charge. And lastly, we also don't want to promote the idea that sex is always harmful or is always about domination. We believe that there can be safe consensual sex that will be better for the prostitutes and those who are visiting them. Thank you.
Hello again, everyone. My name is Matt Cole, and I will be countering some of the arguments that the pro team has just made in support of their resolution. So first, they tell us that legalizing prostitution will make it safer for prostitutes, for the people who engage in this conduct. But what they don't say is that legalizing prostitution will still allow for some illegal, bad activities to be going on behind the scenes. In fact, a 2003 study by the Rand Corporation shows that even in countries where prostitution has been decriminalized, other bad kinds of human trafficking can still be going on behind the scenes. Because of this, we think that legalizing prostitution will actually increase crime because it will make it more difficult for the police to determine when people are breaking the law. For example, consider, is it harder to find someone who's driving without a license when no one is allowed to drive at all, or when some people are allowed to drive? If some people can legally drive, then you cannot easily tell when you see someone driving if they are driving legally or illegally. So, if we legalize prostitution, it will be more difficult to tell when people are being the kinds of prostitutes that are still illegal, when they are still engaged in the bad kinds of human trafficking. So we believe there will actually be more crime in their, if we legalize prostitution, because it will be harder to catch. Then they tell us that this will result in the safest possible environment for prostitutes, that is, brothels. But we don't think that this is necessarily true. Even if some people can now safely participate in this trade in brothels, there will still be people outside of brothels, and they will likely be worse off because now all of the people engaged in the legitimate trade of prostitution will be in the brothels. Finally, they tell us, under this point, that this will result in more testing and thus reduced transmission of sexually transmitted infections. But again, because there will still be prostitutes who are operating behind the scenes, and because it will be more to find those prostitutes, we think that they will not actually reduce the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, and they might actually increase it. Second, they talk about how important the autonomy of prostitutes is. They say that prostitution is not inherently bad. And we would agree with this. Prostitution is not inherently bad. But it does make prostitutes much less happy on average. In fact, numerous polls of people engaged in the sex trade show that prostitutes are typically very unhappy with their jobs, even in countries where prostitution is legal. Since legalizing prostitution will spread prostitution and make it more easy for people to become prostitutes, these people will become statistically worse off as they become prostitutes. They say that prostitution has been around for a very long time and that it probably isn't going anywhere. And again, this is probably true. But murder has also been around for a very long time, but that still doesn't make it right. John Locke says, he is a famous philosopher, he says that the government has a duty to sometimes step in and protect citizens when they face harms and dangers. And in this case, even though prostitution itself isn't necessarily bad, because prostitutes become less happy as being prostitutes and face all sorts of negative consequences as a result of being prostitutes, even when they do so legally, the government has a duty to step in and try to save them from this harm. Thank you.
Hello. I'm happy to now close the side of the proposition in why we support the legalization of prostitution. So, I want to do a quick overview or summary of what we've seen today to show you why we should legalize prostitution. The first is what I told you at the beginning of the debate, that legalizing prostitution is the safest way for women who are involved in these markets. And secondly, that it empowers women both in their autonomy but also through legal avenues. Although the opposition has put forth many very convincing arguments, we do agree that the current state is unacceptable and that we need to find a way to make women safer and also create equal opportunities for them. Let's think about what the real problem is in our current situation. Is the problem the prostitute? Well, I put forth at the beginning of this debate that prostitution is not a crime. It is not inherently harmful. It is not violent. It does not take away rights. It is not inherently a crime, and the prostitutes should not be punished. The real problem is the oppressive or unequal treatment of women in current societal structures. We think that this problem is separate from prostitution, and we think that women should not be treated as the problem, but instead the way that women are viewed is a problem. And we don't think taking away more rights and more autonomy will correct this. So, the big idea is more regulation equals safer environments for women. Let's look at the Prohibition era in the United States. Prohibition was when the government decided that alcohol should be completely banned because it was harmful in nature. We can see that with drunk driving or violence when under the influence of alcohol. However, the result of this blanket ban was more crime, more violence, as these systems were pushed underground outside of the legal regulatory system. We can see a clear historical example of why banning something doesn't make the world safer, even if you can say that what you're banning could be harmful. And we do agree, in some situations, prostitution can be harmful for women. But not because it's prostitution. It's because the men or the consumers are violent and cruel. And in the current system, there isn't a way for women to get help. I think the biggest reason to regulate prostitution, instead of criminalizing it, is that it gives women the power to come forward and say they're breaking their contract, or they aren't licensed, or I'm being violently abused by this consumer or by the corporation that's running this. She has a legal way to protect herself. She is also able to get health benefits, tax benefits, lots of very good things that come with being legally employed. And the second and biggest thing is the autonomy, the idea that a woman should be empowered by her body, not criminalized for it. Women are sometimes, there are few opportunities for them in certain areas and societies. If prostitution is the only way that they can make enough money to support their family, wouldn't it be better if they did it through a legal way where they could get benefits and securities from regulatory bodies that can enforce certain rules to keep them safe and certain rules to keep them healthy? We've shown you that this will increase testing for STDs, both on the prostitute's end, but also on the consumer's end. And we really believe that women will benefit from legal leverage, so legal power. So for the reasons that it's safer and can empower women, we think that prostitution should absolutely be legalized. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to present the final argument as to why prostitution should not be legalized. What is the most important thing that was raised in the round by both sides? It was the well-being of women and the well-being of prostitutes themselves. Overall, in summary, we believe that legalizing prostitution will not increase the well-being of women in society and will not increase the well-being of prostitutes themselves. In the Netherlands, they have experimented with legalizing prostitution. This is a quote from the Spiegel publication saying, "The Netherlands chose the path of legal deregulation 2 years before Germany. Both the Dutch justice minister and the police concede that there have been no palpable improvements for prostitutes since then." What is this saying? This is saying that legalizing prostitution has been tried, and in doing so, we have found that it does not improve the lives of these prostitutes. The pro team told us that legalizing prostitution would make for a safer situation for prostitutes and reduce the amount of STDs. But my partner effectively told you why this would still allow for trafficking to go on behind the scenes, and that crime would actually increase because it would be harder to tell if someone was committing a crime, and that this would not reduce the STDs that are present in the society because prostitution that is not legal and regulated would still go on behind the scenes, behind the blanket of regulation. The other main point that was made by the proposition side was that we should promote the individual autonomy of women, and that prostitution is not inherently harmful. But we tell you that prostitution is harmful for women because of the way they are abused, and there is not a way to make it so that that does not happen. The pro team continue to say that we don't want sex to be harmful or about the domination of women, but in fact, prostitution continues to make sex about the domination of women by men, which leads to why our points show you that prostitution should not be legalized. One of the points was that prostitution promotes the dominance and putting down of women by men. The pro team said this will reduce, that legalizing prostitution will reduce the social stigma of it because it is simply a service and women should take control of their bodily autonomy. But this is wrong. If we legalize prostitution, imagine a situation where a woman could choose between being a prostitute or being a politician or a doctor. Men will laugh at the woman who wishes to be a politician or a doctor, who wishes to have these positive contributions to her society. And so legalizing prostitution will continue to create objectification of women and will actually not improve this situation. And so legalizing prostitution will still make the situation worse for women. Our other point was that prostitution increases sex trafficking and violent crime. The pro team said that all you need is good regulation. Well, we have two responses to that. One, that this is good in theory, but in fact, as my partner argued, trafficking will still continue and will still exist and will make life worse for most prostitutes. And second, as I mentioned earlier, that most countries do not have the situation to enforce these regulations and rules. So even if they were to work somehow in some societies, in general, it will not be good for the women because these regulations will never be enforced. Therefore, we should not legalize prostitution. It reduces the well-being of women in society. It reduces the well-being of prostitutes in society. Thank you.